Hello, and welcome back to Knights of the Nerds Table. I'm your host, Dietr, and this is Dietr Knows, the segment where I do a quick deep dive into a piece of obscure pop culture trivia. As I promised in my She-Hulk primer video, which you can watch right here on this very channel, today we're going to be talking about She-Hulk, and specifically the obscure fact that She-Hulk, not Deadpool, was the first character to break the fourth wall in Marvel Comics. I'm sorry, what was that? You already knew that, because thanks to She-Hulk Attorney at Law, everyone knows that now. Yeah, okay, I should probably explain real quick. For this segment on the channel, I try my hardest to pick facts that I think the general populace won't be especially familiar with. When I pitched this episode a couple of months ago, all we had was the first trailer and the information that She-Hulk Attorney at Law would be a workplace comedy. So here I am, writing the script for the episode when all of a sudden, bam, the second trailer for She-Hulk drops, and she's looking in the camera and she's talking to every last one of you, and she's furthering my belief that Kevin Feige has a personal vendetta against me and my channel. But we here at the Knights of the Nerds Table are more than willing to persevere in the face of adversity. So please like, subscribe, and let's see if we can learn a little bit more about She-Hulk and her relationship with the fourth wall. First things first, let's clarify what we mean when we say breaking the fourth wall. The fourth wall refers to the border between characters in a film, play, or story and the audience, derived from the idea that scenes in theatrical productions only ever have 3 walls, with the audience looking in from the fourth. Any action wherein characters from the story acknowledge the audience or the existence of their medium constitutes a break to the fourth wall. Breaking the fourth wall is an old idea, and honestly wasn't originally considered that revolution. Ancient Greek plays featured choruses of actors that would regularly discuss the events of the show, and the works of William Shakespeare would regularly feature soliloquies where characters would explain their motivations and state of mind to the audience. As the art of storytelling evolved and audiences came to desire more and more realistic forms of presentation, breaking the fourth wall became less common, but it never went away. Looney Tunes, Doctor Who, In the Heights, Wolf of Wall Street, Emperor's New Groove, and a series of unfortunate events are all examples of modern stories that have instances of the fourth wall being broken within them. Even the comics industry has a history of fourth wall breaks before She-Hulk did it. Anthology horror comics at DC and most Silver Age Marvel comics would have narrators who would address the audience and comment on the goings-on of the story. What if the comic that we mentioned in our last segment featured Uatu the Watcher in that role? And there were even more direct breaks. For example, the first issue of Batman, way back in 1940. In that issue, Batman takes a moment to show the kids of America how cowardly a group of criminals without guns are, explaining to the reader that they shouldn't admire criminals, but rather do their best in fighting them in all their kind. Even so, She-Hulk stood out for her fourth wall breaking antics and bold attitude. The Savage She-Hulk series, back in 1982, ran for 25 issues before being cancelled with, as best as I can tell, very little fanfare. Past that point, She-Hulk remained a staple in the Marvel Universe as a member of the Avengers, but the character seemed to connect with one very important person. John Byrne was a wildly successful writer and artist working at Marvel at the time. Even if you don't read comics, there's better than even odds that you've seen some of his covers on Uncanny X-Men or Fantastic Four before. Byrne had previously added She-Hulk to his Fantastic Four run in the early 1980s, and after leaving Marvel to write at DC and then returning, was asked by editor Mark Gruenwald to create a new series with She-Hulk at the forefront. It would be titled The Sensational She-Hulk, and the only editorial mandate Byrne received was to make it different from what had come before. Byrne took this mandate and ran with it, as he explains on his website. She-Hulk has something of a checkered history. When she debuted in her original series, she was the Savage She-Hulk. She ran around in a torn shirt and broke things. Not much of interest there. Until Roger Stern decided to put her in the Avengers, and more importantly, to show that Jennifer Walters, unlike her cousin Bruce, actually had fun with her Emerald alter ego. When Mark Gruenwald asked me to create a new She-Hulk series, sensational rather than savage this time, he had one editorial demand: make it different. I thought about this for a while, and then decided it might be fun to push Roger's notions as far as they could go, and have Jen be aware, only in her own title mind you, that she was in a comic book, and then to play with, but never mock, the conceits and foibles of the format. Mark loved the idea, and thus She-Hulk got her second series. And boy, oh boy, is Byrne's philosophy on full display right from the cover of the first issue. Imagine you're going through a comic shop in 1989, 10 years before Deadpool would first break the fourth wall in Deadpool number 28, and you're greeted with a comic with a large, muscular green woman in a black singlet on the cover. She's staring right at you and holding up an issue of Savage She-Hulk number 1. Okay, now this is your second chance, she declares, seemingly to you directly. If you don't buy my book this time, I'm gonna come to your house and rip up all your X-Men. How could you not pick up that book? Byrne actually took it easy on readers at first. The first issue was a relatively simple story about She-Hulk being captured by the Ringmaster and his circus of crime. It was a light, fun story that featured a few brief moments of She-Hulk addressing the audience. But things accelerated quickly to She-Hulk berating Byrne about his choice of villain in the second issue, or She-Hulk attempting to lighten the mood for readers in the third issue with a lame attempt at stand-up comedy. The concepts and humor got even broader after that, with characters walking between panels to get places faster, or with Byrne deliberately leaving 3 blank pages in a single issue because a villain called the Living Eraser had erased them out of existence. One of my favorite concepts from this comic was the introduction of Louise Wheezy Mason, a character from the 1940s predecessor to Marvel, Timely Comics, who fought crime as the Blonde Phantom. Wheezy ended up doing something most comic characters never do, aging. And it's explained that the reason she aged naturally is because readers had forgotten about her and she hadn't been in comics since the 1940s. Byrne's sensational She-Hulk was high concept, tongue-in-cheek, and completely unafraid to laugh at itself and the industry and medium it existed in. But it wasn't without its troubles. John Byrne either quit or was fired off the book, depending on who you ask, after issue 8, and wouldn't return again until issue 31. This led to an inconsistency in tone and humor, and a loss of some of those fourth wall breaking elements. It's also important to note that if you're reading this series digitally on Marvel Unlimited, the vast majority of the non-Byrne issues aren't available. Fortunately, Byrne would return to write and illustrate the book through issue 50, bringing back the beloved fourth wall breaking gimmick. Additionally, while this video is not intended as a review, I would be remiss if I didn't mention 2 aspects of the book that modern readers may have trouble connecting with. Firstly, Byrne had a habit of drawing She-Hulk in very cheesecakey poses, with humor being derived at her indignance about having her body exploited in that way. The joke was intended to poke fun at how other artists would use the male gaze to draw in readers at the expense of their character's agency, but your mileage may vary on if the joke lands for you. Secondly, a lot of Byrne's humor involved poking fun at his colleagues at the Marvel offices, which can make a new reader who isn't familiar with the history and politics of 1980s Marvel scratch their heads a little bit. Sensational She-Hulk would run for 10 more issues without Byrne, before ending on issue 60. The cover to issue 60 referenced the first by having She-Hulk demand that the reader hand over those X-Men comics. Sadly, She-Hulk has not continued her fourth wall breaking ways into the modern age of comics, although her tendency to do so was referenced in Dan Slott's excellent She-Hulk run in the mid-2000s, where she directly addresses the reader one last time to say, no, she can't do that anymore. Fortunately, she still hasn't lost her sense of joy or humor, and her willingness to comment on some of the absurdities of her universe within the confines of her comic panels. I love She-Hulk. And if you think you might too, I'd highly recommend picking up any of her self-titled comics from your local comic book store or library. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching. This has been Dietr Knows, and now you know too.